Hey there, good people, and welcome to another episode of The Finnovator with me, Stuart Bell, business coach, founder of our Dairy Coaching Consulting and creator of the Leveraged Advice Firm program. And in this episode of The Finnovator, we're continuing that theme that we've had all of this year, which is about really taking aim at the increasing number of technology options that are available for advisors, accountants, and brokers in their businesses. And rather than just putting in front of you a solution and talking about, what it does and features and benefits, we wanted to dive into the story behind it. And in this particular episode, I got the opportunity to sit down and spend some time with Dan Fitzgerald of, amongst other things, Worksorted. To say that Dan's been doing this a while is probably an understatement. He was part of the Advisor Central rollout at MLC way back in the early 2000s. And his journey has very much been a case of evolving something organically. We call it bootstrapping in the tech startup world. And it's where you kind of reject the idea that you'll go and get investment from other people to turbocharge your growth. And instead you focus on just building great products and growing it slowly. And what I loved about this session is Dan has got so much experience in developing tools. He's also built Worksorted in a very specific way, focusing very clearly on getting it to do some things really, really well, and kind of, if you like, rejecting the idea of trying to go wide and be a master of nothing and a jack of all trades. We also talked at length about the evolution of the tool, and most importantly, we got really, really clear about where it fits in a tech stack. So if you are interested in hearing more about the evolution of a tool that is very much focused on workflow, very much focused on client record keeping, and very much focused on an area that I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but it's definitely underutilized, which is revenue reporting and analysis, I think you're going to really enjoy this episode of The Finnovator, along with just hearing Dan's stories and his insights. So we're going to kick into it, but I want to let you know, by the way, we recently launched a brand new tool which is available to you as a listener of the podcast, and it's a benchmarking tool where if you'd like to, you can go in and benchmark your practice. I won't talk more about it. You can check it out at practiceanalysis.com.au, and I'd love you to give it a whirl and let me know what you think of it. But without any further delay, I'm going to hand over to Dan, and let's get stuck into the story of Worksorted. So let's jump into this, and let's welcome the man of the moment. Dan, are you there, mate?
Yes, Stu, I'm here.
Good morning.
Nervously yours, mate. How are you?
I'm good. It's Friday. I've got the weekend. I say off from the kids, but we're going to go and do adulting for a little bit, which is going to be fun.
Nice.
I understand it's raining where you are.
It is raining, and I won't have the luxury of being kid-free this week with 3 under 4.
Wow.
In my household, so she'll be a busy one.
That is a different level of logistics, I feel.
Yeah, well, that's added to that is 2 from a prior, so that's it gets pretty busy around here at times.
Wow, you should try TV sometimes. It's a good alternative use of your spare time. Mate, let's dive into this, because I've got, as you can see, there's a lot to get through, and I know we've got some users here. So look, let's just kick it off by saying I don't want to assume that everybody knows you, or so for those who haven't sort of heard of Worksorted, or they maybe know a little bit about it and they maybe don't know who you are, can you give us a bit of overview of what it is, how it works, who it's for, and your involvement in it?
Yeah, what Worksorted is a web-based application that's used by financial advice businesses principally across our country. It's a system that I founded back in 2010. Or near enough to that. So we've been steadily building, growing out our clientele, our client base, steady as she goes, profitably, sensibly, patiently, building up a business, which somewhat differently, I guess, from the way some of these, fintech didn't exist when we first created this, but now it's a thing. So we're not one of the cool kids that goes and raises shit tons of money and pees it up against the wall really quickly. We've just done it really slowly and steadily, out of good old conservative Adelaide. A few on the call, we do call our customers and have for quite some years from the names I saw before. We're still behaving somewhat like a startup and trying to get our name out there and just keep the wheels moving.
It's funny, I was speaking to Robert Skinner. You might know Robert. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the fact that there was a time when it wasn't called fintech. It was just software for advice businesses, and it sort of kicked in and changed. And it's changed massively over the last 5 years. I mean, you go back to 2014, there just was nothing there, and now there's maybe too many options. Would you agree?
Yeah, I wouldn't agree there's too many options. I think we could do with a hell of a lot more options, but I think, unfortunately, we've been beholden to some incumbents that are pretty hard to wrestle out of their stronghold. Whole bunch of reasons for that. But no, I think it would be nice to have more technology available to people to choose. And in fact, I think there is a plethora of things that are available. Whoever it was that asked about integrations, I mean, integrations opened up the world, APIs and webhooks open up the world to all manner of integration options, and for advisors and advice businesses to use new tech that's out there, and some pretty cool tech that's there. So no, I say we need more, but I think the workload maybe needs to be spread, and eyes need to be a little bit more widely open to new technologies than the industry has been in the last 10 to 15 years.
Fair enough. I'm interested to know, how did you end up in the industry? Because not only in the financial service industry, but then you've got this subset of fintech. And whenever I've spoken to people, it's not a direct line. It tends to be, an interesting story. How did you get in here?
Well, I tried to get out at one point. I sold a business a few years ago, that OLICC, I think you mentioned in your introductory thing. Out. But my love of computing goes back a hell of a long way, actually. I was fortunate. My old man was an engineer with Postmaster General and then Telecom and then Telstra. So wow. In that capacity, through the 1950s and 60s, he had a very strong love of gadgets, gadgetry things, and I remember, and also for building things, he was a very good carpenter in his day. He's still ticking along, but he's not doing much carpentry anymore. But I remember in his shed, I found what appeared to be a bomb, in fact, because it was a briefcase. And in the briefcase was like a keypad, and it was all padded with some foam, and there was a keypad in there, and then there was a display of about only, 15 or 16 digits. So it looked like, that typical bomb that you see in the movie, right? And I thought, what on earth is this? And he shared with me that it was he claimed it to be one of the first ever personal computers, and he somehow commandeered it through his many years at Telstra. And it sat in the shed, so I blew the dust off it, opened it up, and he promised that he'd teach me how to program it. But it was really just like a calculator, right? It didn't have much function in it, and a very basic kind of keypad that you would enter stuff into, and there was nothing really attached to it. So it was a standalone computer. Unfortunately, in some ways, it was only codable using hexadecimal straight out, right? Straight hex. So I had to learn. Wow. It was about 9 or 10, and he taught me hex coding onto this little computer thing. But so that was where it started, my first love of kind of tech and gadgets, and I was intrigued by what you could do on this very basic machine. But then Commodore 64 came along, and he and I used to cut code in BASIC as it was. We'd copy, scripts out of the books that 64 came with. We'd create our little inventions, save them to the tape that went, the tape deck that went with the Commodore 64. Forgive me for anyone that's thinking this is like way back when, and this guy must be super old. But so the C64, he and I used to program it together. And so I sort of love computers. And that was the tech side of Dan from my foundations. In terms of the finance side, actually, Donna, who's on this call, I must confess, I think she's still on the call. Stu, she hasn't dropped off yet. Donna is my first cousin, and I think she may have played a role in this next part of the story. A few years my senior, but Donna went on a trip with my sister, more than one trip, I think, like around the world sort of trip. And anyway, my elder sister came back from one of these journeys with having been to the New York Stock Exchange with two things. One was a poster of $1 million cash. And wow. So that stayed on my wall for many, many years through my teenage years. And a T-shirt that said something to the effect of "Money talks, bullshit walks" from the New York Stock Exchange. And so I wore that around proudly as a guy who loved a little bit of finance and saving money and those sorts of things. So I've had fintech in my veins for many, many years, but now it's just formulated in a new term. So let's try to cut the story a little bit short. I could be here all day, but
that's good.
I was intent on a medical degree. That was sort of where those around me seemed to want me to drop into. But I dropped out of pretty quickly, and I found a job in a building society as the mail boy. And so I my career progressed in finance from there. I was working full-time, studying. I did a business and an honours degree in economics. So I've always kind of had this kind of computing, product management, software and finance stream. And then in terms of funds management, I popped into Zurich. My former business partner in OLICC, the co-founder of that, Cliffy Garrels, brought me across into Zurich somewhere around 1998. And we commenced OLICC some years later in 2004. So OLICC was, for those who haven't heard of it, it has some functions that exist in Worksorted today, an emphasis on revenue management and workflow. It does a lot more than OLICC ever did. But so we sold that, and alongside that, sorry, just to digress a touch, I had an involvement in my first wife now, and we created a financial planning business in 2002, and we were acquiring businesses, and I think we purchased 3 or 4. So we built that up. She still runs it. She's Worksorted client or company number 1 still to this day. So there's always been a strong, running the things in tandem, software alongside the real business of advice. And that's worked well for us, I think.
One thing it's interesting because OLICC was actually a tool. I spent a lot of time working with Cliff when I was at Hillross.
Yep.
And we brought OLICC in. We also looked at Easy Brokerage, which I think was the main sold competitor at the time. And I remember when Cliff sort of came in and said, we sold to Macquarie. And I used to joke. I was like, well, in that case, don't forget to invite me on your boat when you bought it. But I know he worked. I don't think we met during those years, but I know he worked really hard to get that off the ground, and it was a great tool, really effective, really useful.
Yeah, we were only just really kicking it off when it sold, and probably in hindsight, we shouldn't have sold so quickly. We could have done a whole lot more with it, and also in hindsight, I'm not necessarily sure that, and I hold this view to the day, that I don't think that the objectives of the Macquarie and its platform were kind of consistent with what our objective should have been, but it's fine. It worked out very, very well. We were quite happy with that. I took a couple of years off after it, but I still found that we needed to, and in terms of where Worksorted came from, the needs were still there in the practice, and there were a growing set of needs in practices, and OLICC and Coin and Macquarie just weren't kind of moving quickly enough, in my view.
You've got an interesting blend of experience in the technology space, and you've got an interesting blend of experience in the financial planning space. And I know there's been a lot of providers or developers who've come from one or the other angle. Planning businesses who've gone out and built their own software, and software providers. How important do you think it is when you're building any sort of solution that's going to be used to have both of those, the ability to understand it from both angles, or do you think one is more important than the other?
I think the most important thing, in neither of those actually, I think the most important thing is to be able to sit between the two things. So, whilst I've been involved in financial advice firms, I've not been and never intended to be an advisor. It just doesn't sit with me. I have absolute respect for what they do. On the other side, whilst I used to cut code back in the 80s on the C64, I haven't written a line of code in Worksorted. In fact, that's not true. One line of code under strict supervision and with some hilarity. It was a fun thing on a Friday for me to actually do it some years ago now. But so not being able to do that, my job has just become not to be one or the other or strong in one or the other, but to be the intermediator between what one's asking for and to speak a little bit of geek on the other side to convert it into what developers need. So, I think I've got strong fundamentals in finance and in technology, but I don't have the skills to do what the builders do on one hand and the planners do on the other, or advice firms. Got it.
So you've been involved in OLICC. You've had the financial planning business. You've sold OLICC. You've then had a couple of years off.
Yeah.
Is that when Worksorted started?
Yeah, Worksorted was meant to be, initially was designed to be a workflow system that operated outside financial services, not specific to financial services.
Okay.
But as I said, I tried to get out of financial technology once before, but you sort of get drawn back into it. And there was just such a growing need of things within advice firms that weren't being delivered by tech. Many of those arguably still haven't been delivered by tech. But so I wanted it to be outside, and that's where Worksorted was going to be, much broader and stronger than anything I'd built before. But what transpired is that Worksorted ended up back in the financial stream. I'm talking, it only ever really stood out for a year or two outside the sector. But I also branched the product off into another solution for registered training organisations. So instead of creating something that could fit into any industry, I've now got 2 industry-specific tools.
You've ever had a call about the Weworkbook thing, or they just left you alone?
I beg your pardon?
You ever had a call, it's called Weworkbook, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever had a call from the guys that's gone,
Wework? No, not at all. I was out before them actually, but not that they'd worry too much about that. But it was just Facebook was around going, no, this is just a Weworkbook. We're workers. We're not bloody mucking around on social media. But
fair enough.
I've thought about changing the name 100 times, but I really can't be bothered. I remember when we first launched OLICC, and there was a story behind that name I won't detail to you now, but people said, oh, what a stupid bloody name. But it doesn't really matter what you call the thing. It's what it becomes. So
it was memorable. People never forgot it.
OLICC, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I still actually don't know what it means. So why did you start it as, firstly, why were you focusing on workflow and why outside of advice to begin with?
Oh, well, outside of advice was just for a bit of a challenge to learn something new and expose myself in business to certain different things in different sectors. And of course to scale it, beyond financial services and certainly financial services in Australia.
So it was a generalist solution for who are, okay, cool.
Right. Yeah. So it was,
and that was predominantly because you felt like building something that was available to everybody was going to be an easier growth.
Yeah, an easier thing. But, I look at tools now like Salesforce, which, had Worksorted become that kind of industry independent tool, it would look a lot like Salesforce. But then you see how much people need to spend on customizing something like Salesforce down into our industry. So I'm sort of glad I didn't end up there. And I much prefer that we've got something that's available off the shelf, sure, customizable, but it is built for our industry sector. It's not trying to be all things to everybody.
How long did it take you before you realized that going down the generalist route wasn't going to work and then bring you back to advice?
Yeah, I didn't sort of wake up one day and have that realization. It was probably only for a year and a half, 2 years that I was kind of thinking, let's make this the generalist tool. So it happened very quickly that it was brought back in, but it could have also been a function of my connections already being in financial services and what I'd done before. And they were looking at this going, oh, well, yeah, we know this is going to fit in our firm. So yeah, I was trying to be something a little bit broader, but it's okay. I'm not unhappy that I'm where I'm at today with it. It's worked out quite well.
So early, when you were building the workflow software, when you look at what it's become now and back then, most people I speak to when they're developing it, they start off, if they're structured, they're going, right, I'm going to build a software solution that solves these particular problems.
Mm-hmm.
What were you trying to focus on at the beginning, and how has that changed?
Yeah, I reflected on that because you were kind enough to shoot me out a couple of prompters for today. But actually, the notes I wrote down are probably a little bit inconsistent with what I'm going to say now, because I think actually what we set out to achieve, the problems still exist. I don't think, which is a bit of an indictment on tech, I think. And I think, Stuart, when we spoke a few weeks ago, we were having a chat similar to this, is that we've not solved the problems. I think these problems still exist. Like our market share is pretty low. We sit somewhere around 10%, I suppose, depending on which part of our application, whether it's the CRM, the document management, the revenue management. So just call it somewhere around 10%. So it's not just a function of our systems not in use in 100% of practices, so the problem's not solved. But I think the tech plays haven't delivered what they should, and we've still got a lot of work to do to help practices run even better. So, even 12 years into this one, I think the problems still exist. Some new problems have come along, particularly around compliance, more disclosures and so on. But so there's a growing set of problems. But the fundamental problems I was trying to solve, back to your question, were too much emphasis is being placed on the actual production of advice piece. It was all about the SOA. It still is to a great extent with many tech shiny toys that pop up here and there. It's about, they've become about lifestyle advice and, living your best life and building this end-to-end process. But that to me isn't really the problem in an advice practice. Advice doesn't cease, right? You don't get to the end of the advice process and say, oh, we're done now. It's end to end. Now, I think that's espoused a bit by those who think that the end is a sale on a platform or a sale of an insurance product and fulfilling that sale. But advice goes on. So what we were trying to get to was solving the fact that the majority of stuff that happens in an advice business is not producing an SOA. It takes up a ton of time, but it's not the fundamental problem. The problem is the day-to-day, let's call it, review processes and forms and switches and, all the little stuff that goes on.
Absolutely.
In the admin team. So our focus has always been on the stuff that's done most in a firm, as opposed to the things that are necessarily taking up a lot of time, but the things that other people were spending a ton of money and a ton of technology was coming out to try to solve. So we're still solving the same problems, but we haven't fixed them all yet.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You're spot on with that. There is so much focus on building the documentation, but I mean, once you get above a certain level, how you remember to deliver what you want to deliver in the systematic way and get the team doing it, that becomes the main problem.
And so some tailwinds have helped us, of course, too, with things like disclosure changes and fees for no service and the need to bring together your workflow and your service packaging delivery in your revenue. That's fallen into our laps a little bit over the years.
So it's been a 12-year journey, so there's a lot. So there must be a lot to take in. Has it been a fairly consistent journey, or have there been bumps along the road? Things that you hit and realised, this isn't working, and you've had to change direction.
No, it's been fairly steady.
Okay.
We have had a very steady list of, and I think that's because we haven't ever needed to focus on, let's call it like the institutional sale, like selling our software into a large organization. We've stretched ourselves into sort of the mid-tier licensees, who some of whom will not mandate, but get our software out. But we've always stayed focused on the individual practice. So it's been good feedback and easy to collect feedback from the real people on the ground in practice land. And so that's been good for us. Whereas my understanding and talking around the traps to other tech providers is sometimes when you get that big client, that can bring in, it can be wonderful for your cash flow and for your business and for your growth, and for your valuation potentially, but it can really stifle your business. So I think what we've done well is we've got a single system. It's a set of tools that every advice practice has got availability to. We don't have modules. We don't, we've structured it so that everyone gets access to all of the things that we've created over the years. So I found it a fairly steady path to where we are now. Growth has sort of, up and down. You get your good years of stronger growth than others, but I think it's been a fairly steady path from my perspective.
Have you ever been tempted to go for the corporate route? Because it can, it can be an absolute cash flow influx. It can see massive growth. Yeah, you just not gone there.
Yeah, I guess it would be sensible to say I wouldn't say no. People might be listening in going, oh, well, we're thinking of using Weworksorted, but I'm about to say, no, we don't want you. Of course, Stu, but it just hasn't been our focus. And I do think that the industry has held itself back a little bit as far as tech goes, because the decision makers in institutional land don't look at businesses like mine with a small team of punters with a nice broad cross-section of clients across many, many licensees with different kinds and shapes of practices. They don't look at businesses like mine and go, oh yeah, we'll go with you. I think somewhat dangerously at times they make decisions based on what others do, and they look at, that's back to the power of being the incumbent. I mean, I remember the days back at MLC. You might have been there at the time when Advisor Central was being built, and at that time MLC decided that it would head down for the Advisor Central build. They put some software in with Visio. I
was actually involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, and the decision was not to go with Xplan because Xplan was too young, too fresh, too new, too different. It would have been really stepping out on a limb. So, that's just the way sometimes the instos are built and how they make decisions, and that's a little bit inconsistent with who we are and who we want to be, generally speaking. But I'm sure if they're listening,
I'd probably throw AMP's decision to go with coin over the other one as another example. I was at Hillross at the time, and one of the things we were arguing for is, well, if you're going to roll out coin to the whole of AMP, why don't you roll out another tool within Hillross and use it as a proving ground? Because then you can. But they chose not to. It's funny going back to the Advisor Central. Can I tell you a little story about that? Because I was actually working with Mark. It's at the time I was working with Mark Ballantyne, who ended up becoming sort of head of financial wisdom. But one of the things we did is we got together all of these pieces of software, went out to a group of advisors, and at the time the advisors we used something called Workbench.
Oh yeah.
Which was colloquially internally known as doesn't work bench, or work bitch occasionally. And we took the version that we had created. MLC had basically just changed it and modified it, and we took the original version. And guess which ranked higher? The original advisors ranked the original version, which hadn't been bastardized and messed around with, as one of the best tools out there. So it goes to show you're spot on. Sometimes it's kind of like a camel is a horse designed by a committee. It sometimes gets in the way. Yeah,
and that also too often you see that they'll pick up your software and say, yeah, that's great, we want that, but we want our own version in our own walls, under our own servers. We don't trust you with whatever, with the data, and so we want to do it our way. And then we want to create a separate version, and it's like, man, that'd blow my mind. Running two systems like this, it's hard enough running one.
I wrote an article a while ago called "The Problem with CRMs," and I was trying to be as balanced as I could. But one of the things that I pointed to is the fact that in tech startups, when you're in startup phase, your goal is to get as close to the possible as the end user you can, because you'll learn about what you need to happen. And the problem is if your customer and the end user are different people, and you're developing to sell to the and this isn't critical of institutions. If the person making the decision is not the person who's using their tool, then you're going to end up with something that's designed for a scope rather than designed for purpose, and that's a bad situation to be in. I feel exactly.
And also sometimes it's often the case that firms aren't necessarily ready for what you're building, and that's a big challenge that we've had over the years. We build so much so fast, get it to market really quickly, but forget to kind of loop that back into the existing firms that we have. So people are asking, well, perhaps there was one question earlier about how do I get more out of it? There's so much in the Worksorted system now that it has become, and I'm sad to say, there is so much more our practices could get out, but they're not. So it's value that we're leaving off the that they should be able to pick up and run with. But so we've got a challenge on that. But you're right, you've got to keep listening to the customer and focus on what they're looking for.
I was going to ask you about failures, but let's progress it, because I think there's a few questions in here about the tool. Can you give us a sense of how the tool has evolved and what it looks like today in terms of functionality and the focus?
There would be, I've lost count. I'm just thinking of what our current dev list numbers up to. It's somewhere around 9,000. I think that's on top of 10,000 in our old workflow, our own internal development workflow system. So there's about 20,000 things that we've done over the years. 20,000 individual tasks. 10 plus 19,000 actual activities.
So just to be clear, this is development cycles, things that you've added.
Jeez. These are individual tasks that sit within development cycles and releases. We release things very quickly. We have I won't say a daily release cycle, but it's at least weekly. So we have built a lot of things in and on the system. But fundamentally, it has stayed true to its core. It focuses on workflow management, but all the things over and above basic workflow management are checklists and rules and automated processes and workflow document creation, because that sits, of course, on, we're a CRM system. I mean, make of that what you will, but, it's the place where I think we store about 2 million client records in our system. There's around 16 million file notes exist Worksorted. So it's got big, right? There's a lot of, but fundamentally it's, like you've written there, Stu, checklists, automations, basic tasking, sharing of workflow. From its outset, how I mentioned it was built for other industries and other sectors, it was also designed for what I guess we call outsourcing, one step further, offshoring, because it was designed to have the workflow shared outside, or actually not even considering an individual organization. So it was a kind of network of collaboration. And so that's held us in good stead, and still to its core, it delivers for advice firms that are offshoring. Our pricing model is suitable for that. You can have as many users as you like. So we've kind of stayed fundamentally true to a workflow focused application. On the revenue side, again, the needs are much the same. It's you're buying a book. You need to track the revenue that's coming in. You need to understand your own revenue by client, for goodness sake. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that many were accused of not understanding who they were making money from or how much, and certainly not disclosing it. So revenue tracking, super powerful. And also revenue, on top of the revenue tracking, one of the bigger pieces of work that we did was, and we now support this with our own service model, is it's not just the understanding of inbound revenue, but also the calculation and remittance of payments to advice practices and advisors. So it's inbound and outbound revenue management. And so we've got a service that we offer to kind of take that away from licensees and from practices as well.
It's funny. I remember there was a business at Hillross. I think they used OLICC, and it was a multi-generational business. The son had taken over from the father, and they came in around OLICC, and he discovered he'd been underpaid by AMP by about 20 years.
Yeah.
And it was a significant amount of money. It was crazy.
Mate, and that's what I said before. Like, we haven't solved the problem yet. Like, I was talking with an advice practice they're in acquisition mode. They were in our office just a couple of weeks ago, client of ours. They found 23% underpayments on the transition of a book.
Man.
But it's just, they failed to switch the advisor code from that to that. So they didn't get paid. So it's terrible. It's an indictment on our industry, but it's still a problem this very day.
How many mainframe systems are they still running on the back end in major institutions?
I don't know.
There's got to be a few, right?
I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, does that answer your question, okay, Stu?
I think so. Workflow is a big one.
Yeah.
And you've made a lot of enhancements along the way, but you've kept the focus on, okay, really what we're trying to do is help people manage, the delivery of tasks via automations. Client records is a big one, and revenue tracking, which is obviously the genesis of where you're. Yeah.
Yeah. And so can I just throw in on there to mention where we've invested a fair bit of time and effort in the last couple of years is integrations. Someone asked about that earlier.
Yeah.
What's possible to integrate. So we see it as two kind of streams of integration. One is industry agnostic things, Microsoft Suite, email systems, SMS, internal messaging systems, those kind of industry agnostic tools, Xero software. So for payments and revenue processing, of course, that's become important. And we also have industry specific. So that's where we've invested time, is around Xplan integration, Coin, for what it's worth now, with respect to those Coin past and present, and Coin Midwinter. So they're probably between Xplan and Midwinter, they're the two main advice tools. Because what we are not is we are not the advice production tool.
So let's do this, because I think this is a big one, and I think for me, there's a lot of. I remember what was the name of that? Practify. Do you remember that tool? Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's still around, but you'd go and look at it, and it looks great. It was Salesforce, but then again, it wasn't a standalone tool. It was a tool that you needed to plug in. So can we just have a crack at just drawing a quick diagram? So if you're using Worksorted, essentially the focus of this, and I'm just is Worksorted is going to do your workflow.
Yeah.
Client. It's going to do your records, so file notes, all that sort of day-to-day tracking of who did what by when, and it's going to manage your revenue.
Yeah.
What else do you need to bring into the mix in order for most businesses to kind of complete the party, so to speak? What
would ordinarily happen is, as our license is across the business, everyone in the firm would have a seat at the table for Worksorted. Fundamentally very important. There's no shared logins. There's none of that rubbish. You are each contributing as members of your practice to the Worksorted database. Very important from a compliance and tracking perspective, right? So everyone gets a seat on Worksorted under the license. What we espouse is that, let's say we're starting up a new business from scratch, you'll need something that constructs your advice. Now, of course, different businesses offer different types of advice. Some in the self-managed super space, some in the aged care space, some in the investment planning space, some in the superannuation and retirement planning, right? So from this, the diagram can become pretty busy, Stuart, because you could end up, depending on the type of advice, you may need 3 or 4 different advice tools to most appropriately deliver best of breed advice, the fastest you can do it, whatever your objectives are around that. You may have 3 or 4 individual tools that drive your advice production. Okay.
So, but ultimately, if you're somebody who's using a Word template and you're producing it, that's fine. If you want to go out there and have like a tool that will literally produce it from a bunch of coding, as long as you can produce the documentation, then presumably you'd upload that documentation into Worksorted as your single truth.
Yeah. So what else? Just to pick up on that, we've got a Microsoft Word plugin that does pretty much what you're just suggesting there. Drags data out of Worksorted, puts it into a templated Word document. Upon saving that Word document, copy of it sent back into Worksorted against the client record, right? So that's a simple loop of integrations.
Okay. What about outbound communication en masse? Is that something you do from work? So in other words, you're okay. So email marketing, we'd turn around and say you could do that through Worksorted, or is
okay. Calendar, yes, you could. SMS marketing, messaging, all process automated. You can automate all your communications with your clients. So we've got embedded email applications and we've got embedded SMS applications.
What about, for example, cloud storage?
Yeah, you can, mate, we've got terabytes.
Those integrations?
Terabytes. I mean, and we popped up there in that Net Wealth survey, we popped up in a couple of categories which we weren't expecting to. One was document management and storage, right? So it's like, oh yeah, shit, yeah, we do that too, don't we?
So that sits within you.
Yeah, it's internal.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, you could store it out in something else and loop it through, but as I was saying before, like the sky's the limit as far as integrations. And the last couple of years, we've invested a fair bit of time to build out our APIs and webhook structure. So it kind of now puts it in the hands of the practice to connect up with whatever the hell they want to connect up to. If you want HubSpot file notes to push in through as a file note into Worksorted, knock yourself out. But
so this kind of brings my next question, and I might turn this off. Like, there's a couple of, I'm not going to name names, but there's a couple of tools out there who will say, oh, we can create APIs between different systems. Yeah. And then when you go and have a conversation with them, you realize they haven't built the APIs, but they're happy to charge you to build the APIs as and when it's needed, right? And then there's some systems out there where to get an API, it's kind of like you got to fill in a form and post it in, and it's like if I'm an advisor and I'm in a practice and I want, for example, my data to be shared with ActiveCampaign, or I want, a automation to trigger something between that and my web, whatever it might be. Or when I set up a client in Worksorted, I want them to provide access to my member site, which is maybe in WordPress.
Yeah.
How do I go through building an API? Have I got to get a developer? Is it something you can do? Is it literally just a case of putting the key in and hitting a button?
Yeah, a good question, and I'll really try not to get too geeky. Just stop me if you think it's. I won't be offended, man. The trouble with APIs that you're kind of alluding to there is that, and I've seen this so much over the years, and it pisses me off, quite frankly. We can always delete expletives out later, can't we? But technology provider A says, "Oh yeah, I've got an API." Technology provider B says, "Yeah, I've got an API too," and that's about where it ends, because it's not enough. And without wanting to get too heavy into it, you need someone to build the connection between them, right? To say, yeah, I'm going to take stuff from there and use that API to push it into there. So that connection has to be done. And all too often, there's talk about integration potential between, potential technology partners, and it ends at about the point of, I'll send you the link to my API, or I'll send you the URL. You can knock yourself out and go and look at the documents. Good luck with that. So there is a big gap in that happening. But even if, and there are, just to throw in this, there's other kind of connection tools that are relatively new. I mean, 5, 6, maybe more years. I could be wrong by a couple, but things like Zapier and Pipe Dream, as opposed to Pipe Drive, the sales tool, they kind of take those two connections and encourage, or the two ends of the spectrum, and encourage each of the firms to go the next step and to build their connection tools sufficient so that when those two come together, something like Zapier can be really easily used by technicians, probably not normal people that you see in advice practices, but for bigger practices, those who want to really get serious about this, you don't need too much of a skill set to build, get usually a young kid that comes in and is happy to kind of connect those dots in the API using something like Zapier. So did I go down the right track there?
No, this is perfect. And I think this is a really good point. There's one of these I did with a lady called Debbie French. It was called Mastering Practice Technology. And this was a firm who, a lot of the times you go and you talk to firms about technology, they go, I just can't get it to do what I want. Yeah. And every single time I was on a webinar with Debbie there, and she was always the same. It's great. We can get it to do. And I wanted to understand the difference. And you'd know about the paradox of automation, which is the more automation you have in a system, the more human oversight you require. Right. And this is the thing with Zapier. You need it's kind of like wiring a plug. It's not perfect. You've got to find roundabout ways of doing it. But if you don't have somebody that's going to sit there and monitor it and make sure it's doing it, it breaks. One connection goes off, and you can just end up with all sorts of problems. And I think this is the thing. It's like, if you're going to go down that route of wanting to have multiple tools doing different things, best of breed, and you don't have someone in your business who knows better than everybody else how this works and can fix it in a heartbeat, you're kind of going down a route where your system's going to break and you're not going to be able to fix it. Yeah,
but it also becomes one of those questions that we're asked, about integrations. What's the potential? It's whatever you like or whatever. Yeah. We're not going to do all of it. And I think back to our MLC days, and we handed advisors a pretty neat piece of interconnected software in Advisor Central. It was pretty good, right? And a lot of nice connection points. But that was a $200 million spend or something to create that.
Was it 220? Whatever they said it was,
give or take 20 million. But it doesn't cost anywhere near that to connect things up. You're spot on. You need a resource in house, but there's no longer anyone investing the big money in tech like MLC was back in those days, or AMP have over the years, and will continue to do so with their Salesforce build, which I think is still going. So it's not going to be handed to advice practices on a platter anymore. If I can, no. I'm not being disrespectful in that, but it was landed and it was given unto the practice, and the practice would, take it on, not necessarily willingly, but accepting of what was delivered to them. Whereas now practices have got to go and chase what they want to build themselves, and do a bit of that work, I think, because there's no alternative at the moment.
I agree. The biggest practices that I've worked with, the people who get to that point where they're getting plus $3 or $4 million worth of revenue. They've got 20, 30 people. They build their own tools.
Yeah.
Because ultimately they have their own compliance. They have their own licenses. They build their own tools. So when you look at the tool, what are the businesses that tend to get the best benefit from something like Worksorted? And what are those that you tend to look at and go, you don't need this. You shouldn't be going down this route. You should be going down a different route.
Yeah, I think the most value comes, larger firms get the most value because of the way we're structured in our licensing. That's one thing to say. So we have attracted some quite large firms, what are they fighting above our weight in terms of the size of practices that deal with us. But we have practices great and small. In another sense, so large firms and those that are offshoring and outsourcing and have kind of got a large number of users and need to kind of manage all that workflow around a large client base. We've had great success with aligned firms. So, those aligned to the larger institution groups like AMP and over the years, maybe that's courtesy of my background. I'm not too sure, but the large groups. And we tend to have attracted the renegades a little bit. So they're early adopters naturally, but what the value that many of those get out of what we do, and the reason they fight so hard to retain us, and that's often despite, the institution saying, we've got this new shiny thing that we've paid tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for, you will use it. We get those who will say no, and the primary value that they get out of our system is what we've sometimes termed data independence, control of their own data. And that's right. It flies a little bit in the face of this kind of the licensee must, how the legislation now suggests they've got to have complete control and complete access and complete upper fee for no service stuff, make sure they know what they're delivering. So it's against this sense of control that the institutions have tried to lay down, but we've still been growing in licensees who have stopped short of saying you can't use Worksorted. but they have been extremely encouraging of them to use their out-of-the-box solution.
It's interesting. It used to be a thing, right? You can't use it. And now I just don't think licensees have the pulling power to turn around and go, you can't use that anymore. It's particularly hard. I think we shouldn't mention names, but anyway.
No, it's not. I'm
going to take a few questions, actually, and then I want to circle back and talk a little bit about where things are at now, where you're headed. Stephen, really good question, and we sort of skipped over it, so I want to come back. What have been your biggest challenges in growing the business? I mean, like he put an example, has it been finding people, finding the funding to get the people, knowing what to build?
Oh, no, certainly not knowing what to build. That's easy. That's easy bit. I think balancing risk, I'm not particularly, I'm somewhat risk averse, I guess, in many respects. Back to the comments before about wanting to run it profitably and sensibly and conservatively. So the thing that's probably held the business back is the founder's attitude towards risk, right? Just doing it a bit differently. We could have thrown another 10 developers on, but it's just been, I've just wanted it to be steady as she goes, good solid growth year on year. So funding hasn't been the problem. Back to Steve's earlier suggestion, it's not been. Yep. It's been. I mean, the first couple of years it was, what do they call it? Bootstrapped. Like tip of money.
Bootstrapped.
Not
good word.
That's the saying. You like that one? I'm getting up with the lingo.
Bootstrapped. Yeah.
Bootstrapped. So yeah, like I self-funded it for the first few years. So it took a bit of time from a funding perspective to get that into the positive zone and be getting out of it what we needed to. But since then, I think we've had the right kind of pace. That the challenges have probably been perhaps somewhat geographically based in Adelaide, not being in the in the big smoke of Sydney, Melbourne, not so networking not as strong. Like we've kept to ourselves a little bit. So if in hindsight, I probably would have shouted a few more things from the rooftop a bit sooner and perhaps travelled a bit more and got the business out and about a little bit more than we have. We sort of stuck to our own devices and kept to ourselves for a little bit too long. So that's probably the biggest struggle we've now got still, is to get the name out there. And now I think a compounding problem is that because our system does so much and it is different from what others do in many respects, we kind of get pigeonholed into various categories of what we are and what we're not. Like one of the biggest struggles was from an industry analysis perspective, people would come around to fintechs and they would score you against how you rated against an X-Plan or a coin, right? The things that you did. And so they'd score you as a 30%. What a terrible job Worksorted. But I think NetWealth have done pretty well at getting us out of that zone. And they're kind of looking at the industry a lot more cleverly in the way they categorize us. So I think one of the problems we had, just to come back to the question, is that we were pigeonholed too much up against tools that really had nothing to do with what we wanted to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alex has got a really good one, and I want to ask this one because it's awesome. What's your favorite tips or hacks? Why are you laughing, Alex? You guys know each other?
No, I don't know Alex, but I'm scared for his question because you're loving it.
I'm a Worksorted user and would love to know Dan's favorite tips or hacks. What are the best automated process Dan's has seen in the system? See, it's a harmless question.
Okay, well, I might have some news for Alex because you've asked me to give away some things later in the session. So I can perhaps give Alex a little bit more time than the 2-minute answer to that question. Let's put it that way for now.
Okay. All right. Well, given we've got like 5 minutes left, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Oh, okay. But just maybe to give Alex a little bit of something to take away in the absence of anything else. One session I ran ages ago, I've been a little bit out of Worksorted for the last couple of years with it run by others presently, and that's been kind of fun in some ways. But one of the sessions I ran a few years ago was precisely that. I just picked up, like, there's hundreds and hundreds of automated processes in the system. I think that's one classic place to look for some tips and ideas. There's hundreds of them. In fact, it might be thousands. So they're running like all day, every day. And all I did for one session was I pulled out the top 10 things that people are doing. And I rated them based on the volume of activity that they were delivering. So it was, a simple example, a birthday message being sent out, right, automatically. It's a pretty basic example, but we've seen a lot of growth in the automation and it works really neatly. and it's not just SMS messaging, it's emailing and workflow and so on. So there's a lot in there. What I might do, Alex, is this is slightly different off of what I was going to talk about later on, Stuart, but if you want to send me an email, I might even go back through the exercise again, and we'll just drag out from real life case studies what's sort of driving workflow efficiency in practices through automations.
Okay, what's the email they should email you on if they want to dive into some of those real life? It sounds like you got a lot going on in there, and it'd be really good to the top 10. Geez, sounds phenomenal.
D Fitzgerald.
D, no, not B. That wouldn't make sense. B.
No, it wouldn't really. D Fitzgerald at worksorted.com.
There we go. Worksorted.com. Okay. And just email you and say, I am interested in knowing what your top 10 automations that I don't know about. That's where you want to go with it.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. So let's, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm really keen to sort of talk a little bit about where it's headed, where you see the future, where it's going to be developing. But I think you mentioned if anybody has to go early and they do want to know a bit more about the tool, or they'd like to, get in contact, there's a way that they can sort of take a first step, right?
Yeah, first step, I guess, go to the website, usual traditional thing, or just email me directly if you prefer. It's underway. There's team members in there that can take you through the application, have a look at it, see what you think, and so on.
Okay.
But yeah, so stock standard, we do. There's videos available online as well, I'm sure. So plenty of ways to get in touch.
Okay. And is there anything special you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, I thought because you suggested it might be an opportunity. There's many on the call that didn't know the first thing about Worksorted and not known to me. But there are also some existing clients. So I thought we'd bundle something up for both of them just to see what we can do. So for the existing clients, what I'd be really keen to do if they're keen to take up this offer is to sit with them and their teams virtually, of course. We'll run a 3-hour review session just to make sure they're getting the most out of Worksorted. So I'll do that. I'm back in on the tools, have been for the last little while, as Donna knows.
Nice.
It'll be great. Two-way benefit here. I'll learn more about what's going on in your firms. I'll learn more about what you need from us that we may not have presently. And I can share with you how you might be able to get more out of Worksorted. For non-users, one thing we can do, it's a bit of a lower impact thing rather than, signing up and putting your change management life on the line for the next little while. I thought what we could do is we have a revenue analysis that we do, so we can backfill our system with 12 months worth of your revenue data and run some analysis against it for you, down to client level if need be, but also just across product manufacturers and so on. And we would not be surprised if we find, as we spoke about earlier, some underpayments. That would be a bonus. I'm not guaranteeing that, but we can run a 12-month analysis, and we'll do that at half price. We do need to pay some bills and keep our lights on, so that's at $900.
So that's normally just under $2,000, is it?
Yeah, normally $1,800, so $900 if anyone's interested.
And obviously, so if anybody's listening to that and they're going, I have a funny feeling that there's more than $900 under I've been underpaid there. This is an opportunity to Obviously, you can't promise it's going to find anything. Yeah,
it'd just be a good way to see a different cut and dice of your data too.
Okay, and if someone wants to take you up on that, is the D Fitzgerald at worksorted.com?
Yeah, that'll do. Yep, I'll handle it.
Too easy. Sounds good, man. I reckon. Do you know what I know? I think of one of my clients has just discovered. Actually, you know what? I might put them in contact because they're going through a process. We've done a pricing transition, and they've been looking at numbers and going, that pricing transition doesn't look like it's come through. Oh yeah. And I reckon you might be able to help them. A lot of it's.
Yeah, we've got some pretty cool reports in software that does exactly that.
Let's talk about where things are headed. I mean, I think you mentioned you've now got 10% market share. How many users on the platform now? How many businesses?
Each day our usual daily stat is just over 2,000 active users, like real life users that get in and spend a ton of time with us. So that's a really good number, and that's the one we're interested in. Is not so much practice numbers. I don't even know what the advisor numbers are that we support, but it's that we want to know that people are using it and are actually active in software with us day in, day out. So that's a good number, and as I said, it represents around about 10%, maybe a bit short of that. Where's the future taking us? I mean, we'd like to grow that. We think we will get growth just organically. We'll get sufficient growth. Things have slowed a little bit in the last year or probably the last year more so. Through the start of COVID, we're doing pretty well. We're flying pretty nicely. That trajectory continued, but yeah, things have kind of softened just a touch, but there's plenty in the pipeline, so we're not too stressed about that at all. Still very, very good growth rates. What are we looking at? I think focusing on what we do and do well, and just, again, without labouring too much detail on it, is getting better about our ability to connect with other systems or different types of systems, industry agnostic otherwise. And the challenge for us will be, how far do we step into providing that service around actually connecting the dots? Because I just don't see too many glimpses out of practices that suggest they've got the capability, or certainly the capacity, but not the capability nor real intention to get too geeky on that stuff. So I think some group needs to step up and say, we will connect those dots for you.
One of the examples I've always liked to trot out is, I remember, because I'm like you, I got into computers when there was 286s and the Amiga 500s, and I've broken so many 286s, it's not funny. But I remember, there was a point in time where to use a computer, you had to know what the DOS commands were. And equally importantly, you had to know what not to. Del all is a bad command to use, for example.
Yes. But
there's a point, like, I think Tim Cook tells the story. I think he was traveling. It might have been Africa. It might have been South America. But he had a prototype iPad with him.
Oh, yeah.
And as when you're traveling, you probably know, kids tend to be the friendliest, right? They're kind of like, hey. And he gave the kids his iPad. And within minutes, they're swiping. And he realized at that point in time, he'd built the world's first computer that didn't require an operating manual. Anybody could use it. And I think, where we've come from as an industry, we've got we've got tools out there that are a lot of people malign certain tools, but in truth, they're very powerful. But I think we've got to find that blend of something that is easy enough that it can be like the iPad, but also powerful enough to do what practices need. And I think if we can hit that sort of balance, which I think you spoke about beautifully, then we're going to have something that hits the mark.
Well, yeah, and we are challenged with that too. Like, sort of, we've been building out so much. We now sit in so many different categories of industry stats and whatever, but we do have to still invest more time to bring that back in and keep simplifying it. And that, do you want to build more things, or do you want to make the things you've got work better? So yeah, we're not perfect in any sense, but I think what we will is just keep staying close to that practitioner and their environments and delivering for them, rather than taking ourselves into some crazy expectations of growth or strategic alignment with partners that are just going to take our
100%.
Yeah.
I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I love the Japanese sensibility around design. And it's basically, in a nutshell, perfection is when you can no longer take anything else away. And that's just like reduced it down. I think that's the good, beautiful thing. Guys, Dan, this has been awesome. Man, I could talk to you for hours. Dan, what's your biggest predictions over the next 12 months for advice?
Ooh.
Yeah, I know. Big curly question.
This may shock you, but I don't think there'll be much going on at all in the next year or two. I think we're going to have a period just for the next 2 or 3 years before this, the new stuff that's coming out now. I think it's going to be a bit of a hiatus. Good opportunity for us for advice firms to focus on their clients, deliver good service, for us to keep doing what we do. I think it's going to be a nice little period for serious improvements rather than chasing our tail on, trying to fix stuff from before and, remediations and all that. It's kind of getting behind us now. So I'm very, very buoyant and positive about the sector for the next 12 to 24 months.
I think what I've taken from our conversation is a realization. I like the fact that you've gone on a pathway that you've kind of, while all of this evolution has been going on around, you've been very clear about where you're going. You've maintained this clarity on what you're building. I think the points that you make about simplicity, integration is spot on. And I just think what you're building in terms of, those automations sound excellent. I mean, we in our business, General Tele, have been on a similar sort of route to building workflow, and absolutely, for me, that's one of the keys once you get up to a certain level. And the fact that you got automations in the background, powerful. I'm just going to run through some of the feedback. Simon, Greg, would love to get some from you as well. Alex just turned around and said, awesome. Amy says life-changing for our business. Elizabeth, I think her biggest insight was that you need a specialist person on board to integrate APIs. I think someone else made a comment. They might have deleted it since. Answered, yeah. But mate, we've got some more coming through. Desiree, a better idea of the background and the best fit of where WorkSorted fits in our business. We're a new potential user of WorkSorted and can see the benefits of getting the flow of workflow to better. We have never had revenue tracking, so it'll be interesting to see what we find. Revenue tracking is a bit of a game changer. Like I've seen businesses that implemented back in the Hillross days, and suddenly it just gives you this insight. As well as you can often pick up some big missing pieces. Donna, great to see you, Dan. Love using WorkSorted, looking to use it for our workflows other than for FP. Ooh, interested. And it's important to learn as much as we can about what IT solutions are available. Agreed. It's important to learn. I'll say that. I think it's important to learn as much as you can, as long as you know what you're looking for. If you go out into the marketplace not knowing what you need, everything's going to look awesome. And that's one of the issues.
True.
Dan, any final thoughts?
No, thank you, Stu. Thanks for the opportunity to be on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. Have a great weekend, whatever you're doing, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks again, Dan.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Finnovator with myself and Dan. There were some real gems in there for me. I think it reinforced sort of the idea that has been bouncing around in the program for a while, which is, if you are going to go deep in the technology space, if you're going to try and craft your own tech stack, if you're going to try and manage, multiple systems, it's really important that you at least have someone in the business who can manage the all the integrations, that whole paradox of automation. Not to mention some other real insights into how to kind of make WorkSorted work well for you, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I hope you've got a lot out of it. As usual, if there's a topic you'd like to hear more about, if there's somebody you think I should approach and speak to, or maybe you're somebody who has a story to tell, or something unique about your business that you can tell a story about, feel free to drop me an email at Stewart, Stewart, at audere.com.au, and I'd love to chat with you. And a final reminder, we have launched our practice analysis tool at practiceanalysis.com.au. If you're looking for a benchmarking tool, which is something you can come back to every year or every 12 months and get an understanding of your progress, and as well as do a bit of a diagnostic of what at your stage of growth your practice should be focused on doing, and what you should sort of put into the do a little bit later basket. It's there. I'd love you to jump in there. We're making it available sort of widely for a period of time. So make use of it, and once again, let me know what you think of it. That's it from me. I'll be back next month with another episode of The Finnovator. Take care.